I want to turn next to Rosemary Gibson, another member of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, who, to her great credit, put her extraordinary and indeed award-winning skills as a medical writer to the task of raising a warning in our country and worldwide, for that matter, about the dangerous dependency that we have on communist China for medicines. About 2 years ago, when she published a book with a co-author by the name of China RX, which really details the dangerous vulnerability of this country and others to this reliance on China for a host of medicines and the ingredients of those that they don't manufacture in their entirety, both for generic purposes and others. Rosemary Gibson is a very, very esteemed colleague, and we're delighted to have her with us to talk a little bit about what the implications are of this dependency in the wake of this pandemic now, and what we have to do to try to rectify our present vulnerability and get ourselves onto a sounder footing in terms of being able to defend against such diseases as this coronavirus, or the CCP virus, if you will. Rosemary Gibson, welcome.
2 years ago in China RX, we wrote that in the event of a natural disaster or global pandemic, if China shut the door on exports of essential medicines, the United States will be waiting in line with other countries around the world for essential medicines. And that's exactly where we are today. As many of you know, China has withheld masks and other medical supplies from the United States and other countries. We have a perfect storm of a production shutdown in China. Transportation routes and deliveries are held up. And China has commandeered medical supplies meant for export to the US and other countries to use for its own people. So we have the perfect storm of a production shutdown, a disease outbreak in China that has spread around the world, and the global supply of the core chemicals for our medicines, 80% of them come from China. So what was predicted in China RX, this is what we're seeing right now. So what does it mean for day-to-day implications for our country? We've heard a lot about masks and respirators and protective gowns. That production is ramping up here in the United States. Fortunately, before a disease outbreak goes to a larger scale, if it indeed does do that, it will take more time for the United States to build up capacity to actually produce critical drugs. To give you an idea of what we're talking about, if there are people who are hospitalized with coronavirus, those would be very seriously ill people, most of them. And fortunately, it's a small number, but they will need basic critical medicines to be cared for. Again, these are not treatments to cure, but they're medicines to care for people. They're sedatives if you have to be on a ventilator. They're medicines to keep your blood pressure up. And if chances are good that people will get a secondary infection such as pneumonia or sepsis because their immune systems are weakened. And we depend on China for virtually all of the antibiotics to treat those infections. This has been true in the best of times without coronavirus, and certainly now it's true when the demand could escalate. So if there's any silver lining in the coronavirus situation, it is that we are finally highlighting this extraordinary vulnerability on a single country, the world's vulnerability on a single country for essential commodities that are necessary for life itself. Since then, we are seeing movement in Congress with members of both parties that are drafting legislation. Most recently, I saw a draft bill that it looks very, very promising that can help jumpstart production here in the United States quickly. We have tremendous talent here. We've had hundreds of thousands of pharmaceutical engineers and chemists laid off because of our outsourcing to China. And we have the opportunity to take advantage of that tremendous human capital here and put them back to work for our national health security and our national security. I want to address 2 points that to dispel some doubt that may still exist out there about the role for government in so far as bringing our medicine making back home. There's a perception out there that among some that the free market will fix this. To be clear, there is no free market in this market for generic drugs, which are 90% of the medicines we take. Western companies are collapsing. The last US headquartered plant, the $9 billion company, announced it was merging with another firm last year. 2 other Western generic drug makers, Sandoz and Teva, European and Israeli, they announced last year that they're dropping half their products because they cannot make ends meet. Their margins are just too slim. And meanwhile, we're seeing China ramp up production of generic drugs. They account now for 10% of our generic drugs. In just 10 years, they achieved that market share. And soon it'll be 20%, 30%, 40%. India supplies 25% of our generic drugs, but they depend on China for nearly 70% of the core chemicals to make them. So the message is all roads lead to China. And I think it's just a matter of time before China overtakes India in production of our essential medicines because they have the industrial policy resources that they're putting behind it. And bear in mind that Western companies are competing not against Chinese companies, they're competing against the Chinese government because those domestic companies are flush with cash as the government seeks to become the pharmacy to the world. I also want to underscore another point out that's raised out there. Well, we should let the private sector do this and government shouldn't get involved. Again, if you're a Western company and you want to set up a manufacturing plant here in the United States right now, we'll have a situation where Chinese companies can come in and undercut them on price and drive them out of business. This is how we lost our ability to make penicillin, basic things like aspirin. We cannot make aspirin here in the United States, let alone critical antibiotics. So the private sector can't do it alone and go up against, effectively, the Chinese government. Recently, the president announced that it's going to use the Defense Production Act as a vehicle to spur domestic manufacturing. The White House Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy says will be coming out with an executive order, which the president personally asked them to do, that will include Buy American provisions, and it will also support innovation and manufacturing technology, which will help us make critical drugs here in the United States faster, cheaper, real-time quality control, and with a smaller environmental footprint. We have tremendous ingenuity in our country, and now's the time that we can ensure our health security, because this is going to happen again. There'll be another coronavirus at some point in the future. And at that time, China will have even a tighter grip. Right now, China controls the ingredients for thousands of medicines that we need to run our healthcare systems. And the quality has been exceedingly concerning. Some of you might remember the blood pressure medicine recalls, because a Chinese company that was a global producer had highest levels of carcinogens, 200 times the acceptable limit of carcinogens in the blood pressure pills that Americans and people around the world were taking. So we have to find a different path here. We have a strategic direction and a strategic choice to make. Do we want to continue on the same path, or do we want to pursue a strategy where we can have a minimum level of capacity to make our own critical medicines at a time like this? I also want to underscore, and I was looking for a quote here that was in the Chinese state-run media about the threat that China recently posed to the United States. I'll read it to you. If China retaliates against the US at this time, in addition to announcing a travel ban on the US, it will also announce control over medicine production and ban exports to the United States. If China announces its drugs are for domestic use and bans exports, the US will fall into the hell of a new coronavirus epidemic. So we have been warned. We have the opportunity to take this warning and motivate us to bring production back to the United States so we are not subject to the leverage that China holds over us currently. I'll stop there. Thank you.